Hi everybody, and welcome to the next tutorial in our dashboard series. This tutorial is focusing on how to build custom templates in dashboard. It's going to be a fairly advanced tutorial, and it's going to be covering how you can go beyond the standard components that we provide with dashboard and build anything that's in your brain, right? Anything that's enabled by HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you can go away and build it into your templates and into your dashboards. Just to give you a quick overview on what it is that we will be building. This is what you will end up with if you do manage to follow along. We're going to cover off, starting off with just some bog standard HTML, CSS, and JavaScript stuff. They're going to show you how you can use some of the inbuilt variables that we have within a template node, so how you can get access to your message, how you can then also send messages on from your template. We're going to show you how to build integrating in iframes. So if you wanted to have Grafana dashboards or world map node, as we're doing here, embedded into an iframe, that's fairly straightforward in a template, and we'll show you how to do that. And then we're also going to have a walkthrough on some VueJS basics. So the technology under the covers of a template node is VueJS. And you don't need to use Vue.js, you don't have to know any Vue.js, you can just use raw JavaScript. But if you want to, it will unlock a lot of great features for you. So this is dynamically styled based on the hemisphere, for example. We have a computed variable that's automatically updated based on incoming data. This is all based on the International Space Station. We then also have the ability to render lists and automatically, I should say, render content based on the contents of an array or a list of information that you have. We show how you can then use Vuetify, and Vuetify is our pre-built set of components. There's hundreds of different things on here that you can use. So you can use any of these by default in a template node. We show how some of those work really nicely within the template node of a form, for example, sending in a location. And then finally, we also show on Vuetify how you can use vcard and v4, which is a standard view thing, together, and we loop over some locations and we calculate the distance from those locations to the International Space Station. And then based on your form submission, you can also then calculate your own distance to the International Space Station and also plot that location up onto a world map. So I hope you follow along. Like I say, it is a lot. It's a long tutorial, but it tries to cover as much as I possibly can from the very, very bare basics of JavaScript and Vue.js through to how you can best utilize the Vuetify library, for example, the component library, to really maximize the effectiveness of your dashboards. So yeah, like I say, good luck, follow along, and I'll see you on the other side. So before we get started diving into the template, there's just a little bit of a flow that I'm going to get us set up with that will just give us some data to work with and be able to build a dashboard around. So to get started, we're going to need an inject node. We're going to need a HTTP request node. And then if you don't already have it, we're going to need a world map node. And the world map node you can get via manage palette. In the top right, install, just search world map, and then it'll be the first one that comes up that I have installed here. And we're going to output that via the inject node to the HTTP request. From HTTP request, we're going to go to the debug, and the API call that we're going to do, the data we're going to use is from the International Space Station. We're going to copy that link there. I'll link to that description. I'll link to the API in the description of the video. And we're just going to change this to a parsed JSON object, hit done, hit deploy. So when I click this now, over in our debug panel on the side, because we're using a debug node, we get the International Space Station's position as a latitude and longitude. And we'll use that to build out a dashboard and do some analysis and stuff on it shortly. Now, to work with the world map node, which we're going to use and plot it on there, it needs to be in a slightly different data structure. And so for that, I'm actually just going to use a quick function node. Wire this in here, wire that to the world map. If you're not familiar with the world map, if you click it, hit the book, you do get the documentation here. This is the data structure that we need. So I'm just going to quickly copy that in here just so I've got it as a comment. And the incoming piece is going to be message payload, so the message is being sent in, and the outgoing is also going to be message, but we can just make a new one. So we're going to do message equals payload, and we want name, which is just going to be a static string of ISS, a lat, which is going to be our incoming message.payload dot ISS position dot latitude, and then our long is going to be the same thing, message.payload dot ISS position dot longitude. And actually I could have saved myself time there. There is a neat trick which I discovered thanks to Steve for this. If you click this little button here, copy path, just to show you what that places in, it just pastes the path of that object to the thing you wanted. Just if you fancy saving yourself time, it's a big time saver that I regularly forget about. But anyway, there we are. So we have name, lat, long, and the last thing I'm actually going to do is add in an icon, which is going to be ISS as lowercase. I don't need that content, that in there anymore, and we should be good to go. So if I hit deploy and I inject, we wire that off to our world map, and our world map deploys at whatever your host is for your Node-RED instance / world map. So if I go to mine over here, I can see that the ISS position is currently over Africa, or Mali to be particular about it. And so yeah, we're going to utilize that data coming from the International Space Station to build out our templates. So to get started with our template node, we need a template node. So we're going to go down to our dashboard 2 section, and we're going to drop in a template, and with that a few things would have been created for us. So if we look now in our dashboard sidebar, we will see our template node is inside a group, which is inside a page, which is inside the whole context of our dashboard here. So with that, we can double click it and we can see the contents of our template, which we're gonna modify shortly, but we can see that it's owned by that particular group. And we can expand this out and you can see a full thing here. Now, if you're not familiar with Vue.js or anything like that, this can be quite intimidating, but the thing I want to focus on first is you don't need Vue.js. This can just be JavaScript and static HTML, and I will focus on that now, right? So we'll keep the style tags because we're going to use them in a minute. Don't need any script, and instead of that, we're just for now going to render hello world just to show you this functionally working. And yeah, we're just going to use the one template to start with. If I actually switch over to my dashboard, if you haven't already got it open, you can click open dashboard. This, you have unused configuration nodes. There's a bug in Node-RED at the moment. If I refresh and all deploys from now on will be fine, it won't complain. It does deploy successfully anyway, but there's a warning that the config nodes that dashboard added for some reason aren't getting recognized by Node-RED, even though they are there and they deploy successfully. Anyway, hello world should now be rendered in my group. If you hit the open dashboard button, I've got it already open here, and it then has hello world inside my group. If I change the contents of that, hello worlds, hit done, hit deploy, it just automatically updates. So the thing I wanted to demonstrate first is actually how you can use standard CSS, standard JavaScript. So if I make this a H1, so a header 1, large piece of text basically, change that back to hello world, hit done, hit deploy. It now renders as a large piece of text. So it just takes on the default browser H1 styling, but I can override that if I want, for example, it to render as red instead. Hit done, hit deploy. Now all H1s will render as red. The one thing I am going to do quickly as well is on my page, I'm going to edit and change the layout type to notebook and hit update. This just works quite nicely as I'm doing a tutorial. It just renders groups below each other, which as we're doing kind of like a storytelling and iterative process work really well. So the last thing that I'm then going to do is just demonstrate that raw JavaScript works. So if I jump in here, add in my script tags, and I did document.get element by ID, and we'll call it my header dot inner HTML equals updated header. And on this thing up here, I can just do ID equals my header. So now the JavaScript will actually change the contents of this HTML. So this is the functionality. So you have your styling in CSS, your functionality in JavaScript, and your content in your HTML. Hit deploy, and there is my updated header, right? And there's an infinite things you can do in JavaScript. This is not going to be a JavaScript lesson, nor a CSS lesson, nor a HTML lesson. The thing I want to focus on here is what value we are bringing in the template node to help you build your applications out. So we're going to use that as a starting point. Starting example, we'll call that group, just to make sure it's differentiated. And then we're going to add a new group, and it's going to be called inbuilt stuff. And with that, we're going to copy and paste our template, and we're going to move this one into inbuilt stuff. So now if I look here, inbuilt stuff's coming first. Let's just drag that down so it goes below starting example. Inbuilt stuff is now below, and we're going to get rid of the script, get rid of the style, and I'm going to show you our first inbuilt variable. And I'm just going to change this back to a div just so it doesn't have too many opinions about stuff. And if we want to render variables inside our template, you can use what's called the mustache syntax. So it's two curly braces, and the first thing that we have inbuilt is a message. So if I wire, let's wire it from here after we've done a little bit of formatting. I'm going to wire in the output from our function node, which is the name, the lat, the long. Wire that into my template, and template is just then going to print out the contents of that message. So if I hit deploy and I inject, now the contents of that message are just automatically printed out into my template. If instead I don't want the whole thing, I wanted just, for example, payload.lat or just payload, I can just do message.payload, and it gets the nested attribute of that message, and it just prints out my payload. So that's quite nice, really useful way of being able to just display the contents of anything that's incoming. And I'll show you later how you can do some tricks on like conditional rendering and lists and all that kind of stuff when we cover some more of the Vue topics. But the other thing that I wanted to show you is, let's say you wanted to do something reacting to incoming messages. So if I go into our script, there is a thing in script called this. Now this will get you access to what's called the scope of our component, and there is a thing built into that scope called socket, which is the WebSocket traffic that goes under the covers. And if you want to add anything that is behaving and reacting when new messages are received, I can do this, and we'll just show you an example. So we're going to have this socket on message input plus this.id. So it sets up a listener when messages inputs are, I think there's a colon there as well from memory. There is, with message input colon this ID, which is the ID of this template. Whenever a new message is received, we can put that on there as well. Then we can do something with it. So let's just say message.payload as an alert. All right, so let's do done, deploy. So now when I jump on here, at the moment there's nothing. If I then inject something and I jump back to my page, there's still nothing, so that's good. That might not be a thing. Let's just quickly try that without that first. There, alert, that did work. I thought you could... that's weird. Bear with me for a second while I quickly debug this. So message, just going to console.log message, so that when we get the message come in, we can just see its content without it necessarily breaking anything. And on your page, right click, inspect, or equivalent, depending on what your browser is, console. And there's a lot going on in here. So now let's just try that again, inject. It's requesting. Hopefully we see it go all the way. Come on, internet connection. There we go, new message received. Okay, and we did get it out, which is strange as to why it wouldn't then go into the alert. So if we just did again, message.plus payload dot I don't know. Let's just do the lat for now. So if we then hit the timestamp, it's injected. There it goes. That worked that time. I'm not sure why it didn't before. But yeah, so if you want to react to incoming messages without going into Vue.js stuff, that's how you can do it. So this .socket on, and all of this is documented, right? So if you go to dashboard.flowfuse.com, you'll land on this page. If you go getting started or anywhere else really, you go down to the UI template option, working with variables, and it details here what your inbuilt variables are and your inbuilt functions. So this .send we're going to demonstrate very shortly, spoiler. And there's inbuilt variables which are this .message, this .socket, this .id, which are the ones we've just used. So you've seen the spoiler, so you know what's coming next. But if we do then want to send a message, what we can do is in here we can say button, click me. And I'm going to just get rid of this for now because I don't necessarily need it. But we can do window.onClick and equals a function. And that function is going to then do a send. So it's this.send, and it's going to do the whole thing. So this would be the whole object. So for example, if we wanted to send a payload, button clicked. And then to actually have that as a clickable thing, we just do onClick, onClick. And that gets access to the window scoped onClick function, click me. Helps if I wire that up to a debug node, because otherwise nothing's going to be seen from this. So clear out debug. So the template is going to go out to a debug. When you click the button, it's going to do a this.send, and it will just send it to anything else that's connected. So we jump in here, click me, button clicked. And just to demonstrate again, just some custom CSS to make this look a little bit nicer. We're just going to style the button to have a background color of black. Oh, capitals. We really, really want it to be black. Then color white. And we'll give it some padding of 6 pixels. Deploy it, and now it's a clickable button that if it's button clicked every time the button is clicked. And when the new message comes in, just to show you that again, we see the contents of that in here. So that's good. Shows you some static HTML, some static CSS, and some just standard JavaScript. I've then shown you the inbuilt stuff for this .send and for this .message and for this .socket on message input. So let's just name that so it's a little bit easier to navigate ourselves. We've got inbuilt stuff. We've got raw web tech. Let's go build some cooler stuff around the ISS data. So actually the next thing we'll do is we will have our world map. This is not even going to necessarily be any Vue stuff. This is just going to be standard HTML as well. I'm going to chuck in here an iframe. So rather than having to go backwards and forwards to my world map, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to need some style in a minute, and our source can just be /world map. So when we render this function right now, we go out to our world map node. Where is the ISS gone? Let's just inject it to make sure we've got some data on there. Where has that gone? Whoa, what is going on? Name, lat, long, icon. There's something funky going on with this world map node. That's weird. Let's debug this as well. Console. Disconnected and connected. Let's just refresh that. Connected to WebSockets. There we go. Right. The iframe is in here, which is good. Let's click that. Connected, it sent the message. and then hopefully it should be rendering somewhere. There it is. It's down there. Fairly sure that wasn't there before, but it is now. So for the iframe, we want this rendering nice and large. So let's go in and add a new group. Sorry, I realised I was talking very close to the microphone there. I apologise for your sound. Plus group. We're going to call this iframe. And that's going to be on the same page. This is going to go to iframe. And we're going to make it style it down here because it's a little bit cleaner. We're going to go width 100%, height of 100%, just so it fills out the group that it's contained in, and actually fills out the container of the template itself. So now it'll be the full width, but it's not very tall, so we can just change the height here. So 6 is the biggest we can go, so let's just make it 8 rows tall. And there we go, nice and big. And then if we move around somewhere and we get the timestamp injected, hopefully the ISS will appear somewhere around here. There does seem to be a lag with requesting it. It did request it, there we go, and it's come through. There seems to be a bit of a lag with the API right now, but that's okay, we can work with it. So we've got an iframe, we have a world map. I think a nice thing to do would be to start displaying this data in a bit of a nicer format, and then we'll talk you through some of the kind of core stuff around Vue.js as well that will be able to help you build basically to better templates, more interactive templates, yeah, and hopefully make your coding experience a lot cleaner and nicer. So, new one, we're going to take this down here as well. And then let's just call this ISS tracker. And to start with, it's just going to be the message object. We don't need any styles stuff. We're going to build this back up again, and we're going to add in a new one called ISS tracker. It's going to live on the same page. And for now, it's just going to render the message object, deploy. And it's very large, because I don't need it to be large. We can just go back to being auto again and deploy, and the ISS tracker is actually going to jump down to the bottom. There it is. And one thing that I think will be useful for us is if we add a button to our UI. Let's put that in our ISS tracker, and that button is going to emit a timestamp instead of our inject, and that can just trigger our API call. So then now, every time I click this, it will go off and do our API call and update, saves me having to jump backwards and forwards between, which works nicely. So if I click again, you'll see it move ever so slightly, hopefully, subject to internet connection. It's definitely slow, but we're getting there. All right, ISS tracker. I've shown you how you can do static stuff. We're now going to jump into some Vue.js stuff, and actually for that, let's at least start from a new fresh template, because it gives us a template gives us the Vue component to work with. So we want ISS tracker. We have our template, and let's talk you through what these things do. So with Vue.js, the idea is that it gives you a lot of inbuilt stuff that just makes your life easier, and I'll demonstrate a lot of that over the next however long this bit takes. And we have different components and different pieces that we can utilize. Just clearing all of this out just so that it's not overwhelming, and that we can talk through each of the different things as and when we need them. So the ones that I will start with are mounted and unmounted. Anything you write in here will just run when the widget is mounted, i.e. first loaded, and when it's unmounted, i.e. if you navigate away from the page, or for whatever reason you deleted the widget from the front end side, it will run in unmounted. And then methods and the other bits and pieces here we're going to cover shortly. So we're going to render out message, just payload actually, because that's all we need for now. And I think one thing that will be a nice demonstration is for us to calculate the hemisphere. So I'm going to get rid of that one, jump that up, and let's try this again. So if I hit button, there we go, we have our message.payload. And we are going to utilize the data that we have here to work out which hemisphere the ISS is in. So to do that, we're going to add a computed variable. Now, computed variable just automatically reacts to anything that is contained within that particular variable, and that will make more sense in a moment. So if I define a new variable called hemisphere, and this function will run based on anything inside it that updates. So the logic here is going to be that we're going to return, so I'll write this out a bit more explicitly. So if this.message.payload.lat is greater than 0, return northern, else return southern. And I am just going to put in some question marks here just for when data is not available. This question mark just says check to make sure message exists first, check to make sure payload exists first. If they don't, it will just backtrack. And actually, let's do else if this.message.payload.lat is less than 0, else return none. And again, just to make sure that we've got something, we now have our computed variable. So every time message payload updates, or message generally updates, hemisphere will automatically get recalculated. So we don't need to put an explicit watch in here. And then that computed variable, we can access it in exactly the same way. So I'm going to add a new div here. Let's call it a label called hemisphere. And then we'll chuck in a span, moustache, hemisphere. So anything we put inside moustache, the template node will just go, oh, I'm assuming there's a variable called hemisphere, and it will go and check against our component and check for a variable called hemisphere. Now that could live in computed, which is just always constantly updated. It might also live in data. I will just show you a static variable here, which you could reference and update elsewhere, but just for now it's static. And we'll just call it static just to show you that you can actually access this stuff. So we have our static variable there, and the hemisphere is currently southern. The ISS doesn't move so fast, so it does move very fast actually. About 17,000 miles per hour, I think, something like that. ISS speed. 17. Oh, I was close. 17,500 miles per hour. Anyway, so the southern hemisphere is now being calculated automatically. Every time our position updates, that automatically will get calculated and updated as well, which is nice. So that's what computed is for. That's really, really useful. If you wanted to calculate something based on your message, you could do so. Or you could just generally watch your entire message object and react. If actually there weren't variables that you wanted to change, you just wanted to do something else with it, you could just watch your entire message. Alright, let me quickly just check my notes to make sure I'm in the right place to where I want to be. Yep, alright, we're going to actually add, rather than static, we're going to add a locations in here. And we're just going to have that as an array, so open close square bracket, and we're going to come back to that later. And then just for now, message payload. Hit deploy, and I just want to quickly just sanity check where we are. So we've currently got southern hemisphere being calculated, and we've got our raw positional data. Now I can make this look really pretty, but like I said, I don't want this necessarily to be a HTML, CSS tutorial. I will show you some stuff that is a very quick win for this later, which utilizes the same library our core components do, called Vuetify, but I will show you later how to make the most of that. What I do now want to do is cover some basic Vue logic when you're building out your template, which will be really, really useful for you. So the things we're going to cover, I at least want to talk you through. I'm not necessarily going to be able to demonstrate all of them, but I do want to let you know about them, is VIF. So now VIF is conditional logic. So for example, this functionally isn't that useful, but if I did VIF And then in here you can just put a statement, and if that is true, anything inside wherever you've defined it will render. So for example, if hemisphere is equal to southern, you're in the south. If I hit that now and done, I am in the south. If, just for argument's sake, I said not equal to southern, you're not in the south, nothing should render, because there we go, nothing should render because we are in the south. And you can put them side by side. Can just copy that down and do v if it does equal southern, you're in the southern, you're in the south. And you can also link these together, so I could have a v else or v else if, as you would probably expect. So you're in the south, you're not in the south. And there we go, we are in the south right now. Well, the ISS is, I'm not. Speaking of I'm not, that's actually then one of the things we're going to come on to a little bit later, but I don't want to get too distracted. So the next thing that I wanted to cover is v-for. So this is conditional logic. Then we're going to cover list rendering. Now for list rendering, that allows you to loop over stuff. So for example, if I had locations in here and I had London, Paris, Tokyo, and I wanted to render an unordered list, and I want to have a list item for every one of my locations in my unordered list, I could put a v-for location in locations and moustache template, access to the variable, and we'll just print out location. So now that will make me a list of 3 locations. And there we are, London, Paris and Tokyo. So that could be even driven by something you were passing in on your message payload. It could be something that you're keeping track of in your template, anything, right? v-for is just a way of looping over and repeating something. And you could make more HTML and stuff in here. You could have entire components that are rendered, and I will actually show you that very shortly. The last couple of things I want to cover. Which way do I want to do this? Let's do attribute actually. So I've shown you how to render and use variables inside a HTML template, right? You use the curly braces. If you want to drive attributes via your variables, it's a slightly different syntax. And what I mean by attributes is anything that lives after the name of your tag but before the closing tag. So for example, class. You could add class that would be location, and your location down here would then be your CSS, and it would be font weight bold as an example. Hit deploy, and now that's font weight bold. Now let's say that we actually wanted the CSS class to be applied depending on which hemisphere we're in. So in addition to the static class here of location, we can also put a colon in front of it. Now anything inside here will be treated as JavaScript. And again, we could have our hemisphere object. Hemisphere. And I'm just going to do 2 lowercase. So now it will automatically append a class called hemisphere to lowercase, and I can show you that. So if I hit done and deploy, and I'll right click this, hit inspect, that element now has 2 classes. It has location and it has southern. So if I, in my CSS descriptions down here in my style, do location with southern, I might want that color to be blue. And for northern, I might want it to be red. Hit done, hit deploy. And so now my text is blue because we're currently in the south. So that's a really nice way of being able to, again, utilize your variables, and this is a really nice thing for utilizing the fact we are running Vue.js under the covers here. And this colon can apply to any attribute that CSS, that HTML supports, right? If you had an image and you wanted the alt of the image or the source of the image, whatever it might be, right? And I'm going to show a demonstration of that shortly. You can use that colon syntax. Putting a colon before anything will make it dynamic and make it driven by a variable. So it's colon for a syntax when you're using attributes, and it's the mustache syntax when you're just running it in the static template of the HTML. Now, if you are interested, this is actually short for vbind. So there is a similar velse v for vbind. It's just that the shorthand is nice and easy to use. So you can just use the colon. You don't need to put vbind in front of it. Alrighty, where are we? So we've done attributes. Good. All right. So we've got that. We've got our attributes. That's being driven by ISS tracker. We're going to cover the locations a bit more in detail in a moment. And we have our button that updates our position. I'm just going to move the button above the template. And I'm going to change the number. Change the button's label to be update location. Just so it's a bit more explicit about what it's actually doing. And there it is, currently over Australia. And we are then going to use a form. We're going to build a form, so I can show you some other cool Vue things. So do I put this in a new group? I think I will, because it's getting quite busy in here. Yeah, let's do this as a new thing. And we're going to call this one form. And we're going to clear all this out. And we are going to keep data because we're going to use that now. We don't need it computed anymore. And these are all empty anyway. And we can get rid of style. So here we're going to use an input of type text. And we're going to have a label, which is going to be a latitude. We're going to have a div. And we're going to have two of them. We're going to have one for lat and one for long. And then after that, we're going to have a button, which is just going to have the word, I don't know, send. So just to check what that looks like, in here now we have latitude, longitude, and send. I think I might make a new group here. And it's just going to be called your location. I'm going to drag that down to the bottom. And the form is going to live, funky. The form is going to live inside that your location group, just to kind of separate it out a little bit nicer. And there is actually an input there. I can type stuff, but it's not styled very nicely. So I could, if I wanted to right now, go and jump in and create a bunch of CSS and style it and all that fun stuff. The thing I did want to quickly show you first before I do style it is a thing called vModel. Now, vModel will bind the contents of that input to any variable you like. So for example, if I had a variable called lat and I have vModel and a variable called long, I can define those variables here in my data section. And just to show you that they do actually work, I'm just going to put lat rendered statically out here. Hit deploy. So now when I type into this thing, whatever I type just automatically gets rendered out as content. You could have a computed variable based on that, whatever you want it to be, it will just work. What we're actually going to do is have a form with 2 rows, a button, which is going to be a type submit, so that when we submit this form, we're then going to send that data on to something else, and I'll show you what that something else is going to be later on. We've got some funky styling going on there. Is that because I don't have anything inside my button? Send. Okay, it doesn't matter because we're going to override that anyway. I think it's probably reading from up here, but not getting the color for some reason. So I mentioned how we don't actually need to add all our custom styling. So instead of our custom styling, what we can use is our pre-built-in component library called Vuetify. Vuetify is an extension of Vue that has a whole bunch of existing components that you can just use. They just work. And conveniently, they've buttons and they've got text inputs and all that kind of fun stuff. So if I scroll down on this side here, they have forms there. So if I click forms, we can see a bunch of different bits and pieces. And the bit that we're going to need is the V form instead of a full form. And that's a really nice feature as well, which I'll demonstrate in a second. So instead of form, we're going to use V form, and then the @submits. And traditionally, when you submit a form in an HTML page, it refreshes the entire page. Prevents that from happening. So that's good. That will then also define what our function is. So we're going to call that calculate, and we're going to make a method called calculate. And for now, it's just going to return hello world. Not too worried about it just yet. And then inside our form, just strictly jump back to the docs, we have, instead of input, we have this option of v text field. So we can get rid of both of those. That's annoying to read because we don't need rules. We're not doing validation. Label is relevant because we're going to call it latitude, and vModel is lat, and now we can just copy that, replace our existing one here, and have vModel longitude, and then finally instead of button it's just vButton. vButton, done, and deploy. And now we have a really nicely formatted form. If we want that send button going all the way across, I think there is a thing you can do there called block. If I'd copied the full example, it would have just done it by default anyway. But if I do block there, it just goes all the way across. So now I have a latitude, a longitude, and a send. And what I'm going to do, you may have guessed this, is I'm going to get that location plotted onto this map up here. And to do that, we need to wire the output of our form up to our world map. Let's just move these out of the way to make the flow look a little bit cleaner. It's a bit spaghetti, but that's okay. And then we also, yeah, that's actually it. We don't want any input onto this one. So when we send, we have access to the function in here. So we can just do calculate. We're going to do this.send. And we're going to remember that it comes in this format. So your location, lat is going to be this.lat, long is going to be this.long. Now it's all this dot because it's getting the scope of our component as before. So this.lat, list.long. Anytime you're in the scope of the JavaScript, you have to put this dot at the front of it. When you're in the template, you don't need to. It will just know that you're referencing this dot. Because, for example, I could have a function. I could have a variable called lat that was called 1234. This dot lat would reference the components variable that lat instead. That's the reason why. It is what it is. So yeah, name your location. So now, if we go in here and hit deploy, and go up to our thing here, if I just hit send, that did nothing, which is good. Well, it's not good, it's broken. Why is that broken? This.lat, list.long. Let's just check that actually admitted first. So is it going to go to our debug node? Clear our debug. Send. undefined, so that's always good. It is because this is the entire object, not just the payload. So our payload is that, and then the actual message is containing of the payload. Yeah, it even warned me, missing payload. So now if we send it, there we go, 0, 0. So if we go up a bit, let's go like 13, and then it can push up. Our longitude can go to -1, and you can see how you can move along, right? So we've got our location here. We can also get the location of the ISS. It will plot that separately, which is all the way over here now. And so now we can start having multiple different elements rendered. And what we're going to do with this information is calculate our distance to the International Space Station. So we've got the model. I've talked over event handlers, but I didn't explain the syntax. I apologize. Anything at is event handler. So colon is a dynamic variable. At submit, at click, at drag, at mouse over, they all just work. This is a form, so it's at submit, and then the .prevent is a modifier on that prevents the default behavior. So if I did just want a button, I could write it like that, and my function would go inside here and reference a method that I've defined down here. We don't need computed in this one. We don't need mounted. We don't need unmounted. But yeah, there we go. So we've now got that sending in. I'm actually going to stop doing full deploys and do modified nodes only as well, because I think that will stop the world map from clearing its data every time, which it did. So that's good. So yeah, we can send that. And because I've got the name attribute on the object here, world map just updates the existing position rather than adding a new point. If you didn't send a name, it would just add a new point to the map every time. Or if you used a different name, it would do the same. Alrighty, so I have covered some Vue stuff. I have covered the form. I have covered send. I think let's build something shiny and then we can call it there, because I don't want to overwhelm, or I appreciate there's probably a lot of information here already. I've already been going for 45 minutes. Wow, that's a lot longer than I'd planned. But I apologise. Hopefully it's been okay to follow. But yes, the last thing we're going to do is the locations thing that I mentioned. So we're going to add in a... yes, let's do this in a new template. And we're going to have our new template coming down here. And we're going to have that going into a new group on the same page called locations. And for now, I'll just call it locations there. We're going to have a list of locations. And we're not going to watch anything. We are not going to compute anything. Methods we will need in a moment. So we're going to have a method called calculate distance. And we don't need anything mounted or unmounted. Good. And actually, no, we do want a computed variable. I'll come on to why in a moment. We won't need any custom styling. So locations, page 1, widgets. Let's just make sure that's rendering something. It's rendered itself up there. So reorder down the bottom. There we go. So we have our locations. Now, the locations data I have written to the side somewhere just to make this available to me. I will also share the flow with you so that you can easily copy and paste this in yourself. But fundamentally, it is a list of Paris, Tokyo and London. They each have an image taken from Wikipedia, and they each have a coordinate, a latitude and a longitude. And so now if I hit done and deploy it and loop over those locations, don't actually loop over them because that was in a different thing. If I just print out locations, we can see here, we cannot see here, locations, Have you lost connectivity or something? Yes, you did. That's weird. Sometimes that happens. If your dashboard does lose connectivity with Node-RED, you can just refresh. It shouldn't do that. It should reconnect, but yeah, on occasions. So yes, here we go. So we have our raw data. Now for this, I'm going to jump back into Vuetify. And Vuetify has a really neat component called a card, which I can never find. There it is, cards. And there's 100+ variations of this. But there's one down here that I'm going to use, which is this one, which I quite liked the look of. So if you view source, and then it's actually got a lot more in here than you need, but the actual cards themselves are these parts. So I'm just going to copy one card, and I'm going to put that in here. And let's actually look at the stuff that we need. So the card itself has a label here, which is going to be driven by vCard title. And vText, this is just how Vuetify have built their stuff out, is using card.title. We are looping over nothing right now. So let's loop over location in locations. And our image source is going to be location.image. And remember how I mentioned that you can put a colon in front of anything and drive it by that. So here we're driving source now by a variable location.image. vText is a thing that Vuetify do. That's not necessarily a standard Vue thing, but that's going to be location.name. So just to quickly check what that looks like right now. Why do we keep losing connection? That's a bit weird. But so now we have an image of London and an image of Paris and an image of Tokyo. That's nice. Didn't really have to do much because Vuetify has done all the lovely styling for us. And instead of these buttons, I actually want it to tell me a distance. So that distance is going to go in here. And it's going to just be distance for now. And vSpacer just means that everything is right aligned rather than left aligned. Really don't understand why I'm losing connection all the time, but we are where we are. So we have distance, 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 all good. That distance is going to be calculated from our latitude and longitude. So to do that, we need a function, which I think I made earlier, called calculate, which is our method, calculate distance, sorry. And we're going to pass in our location dot, did I call it lat? What did I call it? Coords.lat. And location.coords.long. And we're going to put kilometers after that as well. So anything you put outside the curly braces just renders statically. And so now we have, oh man, why you keep losing connection? Whatever the number of there is going to be, but kilometers. So that's working quite nicely. And then if we jump into our template, and we're going to actually do the maths of this. I have done this before. It is not straightforward, but I fortunately have saved it elsewhere. So I am going to, again, I will include this for you. There is a whole bunch of great maths involved in calculating the distance and converting from radians to degrees, which we do. So we've got lat and long. We need our degrees to radians function, which I have also fortunately pre-made, albeit it's not too complicated. So we have this dot degrees, and we're not going to do message dot payload because my other example that I'm copying from was slightly different. So we have latitude coming in for the city, longitude coming in from the city. No, that was right. We do want message payload because I need to get the ISS message payload coming in. So message here, let's just do const message equals this dot message, just so that I don't have to keep writing out this dot. So message dot payload, then that is going to be city lat, that's going to be city long. So our ISS latitude and longitude, our city latitude and longitude, and then this is the calculation to actually do that. You're rounding it to 2 decimal places, and that should work quite nicely. And I did remember that it did have a check on this, and there was a reason for it, because just in case we run this when we haven't yet loaded our ISS data up, we just want to make sure we've actually got a payload to run this stuff from. So if I hit done, I have a feeling this might be because of running a full deploy. There we go. Yeah, it's unknown. So if I get update location, that won't work because that doesn't currently connect to that node. So now when I run this, it will send that information down to this template node as well. Update location, and there we go. That's the number of kilometers away from each of those cities. And the last thing we could do is add one more V card, which is not going to be part of a for loop. And I'm actually not going to give it an image. And its text is just going to, I think I can just do this. Your location. And calculate distance, location, location. Now this is going to be fun because I'm going to need to use a join node here. Where am I? Bear with me. So don't need locations anymore. The thing that's going through my head is I didn't actually make this far in rehearsals because I was like, I'll be fine. Now I'm remembering why. So our location is going to render at the bottom. I've also just deleted all of that. I didn't want to do that. And now I can't undo. That's annoying. That was silly. I thought I was in a new template node. I wasn't. Let's just pull that back. Oh man, that's annoying. Right, I think it was just that I need. There we go. Right. So then our location is going to render at the bottom. So our location is going to be calculating the distance. And we need to get our location from the form submission. And we need to get the ISS location from this submission. So it's slightly different. So what could we do to do that? We could use a join node. But then that would require us to have 2 consecutive messages at the same time, which we don't really want. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to do a watch on the input. So in our mounted, actually, we're going to do this dot socket dot on message dot input plus dot ID and then a function, and then we're going to look at the incoming message. And we're going to have message.form, and my form is going to output via message.form. So if message.form, store the form data. If message.payload, which we just keep for the default, store the ISS data. And then we're going to have a local variable in here, so let's just clean this up so it's a bit easier to read. So we're going to have another variable called ISS, which is going to have a lat and a long, and we're going to have a your location, which is going to have a lat of 0 and a long of 0. So then when we receive a message, which this will get triggered on, if we have a message.form, then this dot your location is going to equal message.form dot message.form. It emits what we need. And then this is going to be message.iss equals this dot message.payload. Don't need the this actually because the message is coming in here. So let's just check that's worked. So the way we can do that is just having them output up the top here. So we have ISS and your location. We have the form submission. Whoops. We have the form submission, which is going to need to go via a change node, because we want to have message.form is equal to message.payload, and we want to delete message.payload. So if we try that, let's give this a go. So we've got at the top of here, we've got lat and long. If we update our location for the ISS, that first part updates, which is nice, and we get our thing here. If I put in latitude, just as an example, 12, there we go. That's working really well, albeit that broke, so that's not good. But that's okay. I know why as well. So in our template, we're entirely reliant in our calculation on this dot message. So when we sent our form in, this dot message no longer contained the ISS data. So actually we're better off having that as this dot ISS. And I could refactor all of that, but it's fine as it is. Although actually, no, I do need to refactor that, because this dot ISS won't have a payload. It will do that instead. So if ISS is just going to have .long.lat and all that fun stuff, city long, city lat, deploy. Let's just check to make sure that's now worked again. So good, yeah, that's not broken that, which is the main important piece. So update the location of the ISS. There we go. So they're now still working. It was previously just calculating it from 0, 0, because I set that as the default. And then finally, in our location, rather than hard code printing that out, in our dedicated one, this is just going to be your location.lat and your location.long. And so now when I submit the form, 0, 0, because it's got it all the same. So if I update our location, it now knows where the ISS is. If I then put, which is currently just coming around underneath the US, if I then put our latitude as, let's try 50 and -2, send, so it's just short of the UK, which should be similar to London. Yeah, London is 10,800 away, we're 10,900 away. So that is actually now all working really nicely. I appreciate this was a little bit of a all over the place kind of tutorial, but I have shown, just to recap, how you can render standard HTML, standard JavaScript, how you can use some of the inbuilt functionality that we already have, the context and message, and the ability to send messages on. I've shown how you can render an iframe and render out in different content, whether that's like a Grafana dashboard or a world map, whatever it might be. I've shown how you can use dynamic content, so some of the basics of Vue.js with a v-for, with v-ifs, with computed variables, and also how you can bind data to your content. So for example, CSS dynamically assigned based on, I think it was southern dot to lowercase, in order to be able to do that. And then we had some CS classes that used the hemisphere to style that accordingly, which actually conveniently is now back in the northern hemisphere, so we can show that's actually working. We're not in the south anymore. And then I showed you how you can use Vuetify components to give you nice formatting and a lot of like basic functionality. And then we also use those Vuetify components alongside the standard Vue v-for to render out some V cards that calculated the distance between the International Space Station and those locations, and also any location you submitted manually yourself. So like I say, I appreciate it's a lot, but it was hopefully useful for you. Yeah, we'll be following this up with some more tutorials, some more examples. If there's anything you'd like to see, please do reach out to us, because we can adapt these tutorials based on the requests that we're seeing. And I'll make sure that the flows and the relevant data and stuff are published as well for you to follow along with. So yeah, thank you very much for following along. Hopefully this was useful, and see you next time.